Chile is one of the most geographically remarkable countries in the world. In the north are some of the driest deserts. To the south there are some of the wettest fjords. In the middle it's sort of normal, and that's where most of these stadiums reside. So let's check them out. Estadio Bicentenario de la Florida. The stadium was technically opened in the 80s, but basically it was all built in 2008, as were a lot of the stadiums you'll see in this video. This is partially due to Chile's bicentennial in 2010. The facilities are pretty good. It's an all-seater with each stand raised to give those in the lower rows an elevated view, and every seat in the house is covered by the wraparound roof. Surprisingly, the vibrant seating is not inspired by Florida's colourful reputation. In fact, the stadium has nothing to do with Florida. It's in La Florida neighborhood of Santiago. Estadio El Cobre de El Salvador. El Cobre means copper, and the stadium is in fact owned by a copper mining company. This is a mining town after all, which is not surprising because it's pretty remote. The stadium is around 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles above sea level. So if you have thalassophobia, you're all good. If you're a fan of oxygen, however, you might struggle. At least you get to enjoy a view of some rugged rocky mountains while you suffer from altitude sickness. Estadio Monumental David Arellano. It's actually named after a former Colo-Colo player who died from an incident that occurred during a game. And on top of that, he was actually the founder of the club. So I doubt there's ever been a more obvious choice for a stadium name in the history of mankind. He is certainly more deserving than a copper mine. The stadium's open, mostly uncovered design certainly has its downsides, but once more, it does allow for a mountain backdrop to be seen, which always looks a little bit more pleasant than the underside of a roof. Estadio Francisco Sanchez Rumoroso. This is yet another stadium that was rebuilt in 2008. That was due to Chile hosting the Under-20 Women's World Cup that year. Well, I'd imagine they were going to build it anyway. The Under-20 Women's World Cup isn't exactly worth building a big stadium for. There is unfortunately a running track surrounding the field, but the seating bowl does hug the track pretty tight in the corners. So there's not a whole lot of dead space as there is at some multi-purpose stadiums. Yeah, it's a pretty decent venue overall. Estadio La Granja. Back in the day, this was one of the more prominent cycling facilities in Chile. The velodrome has since been replaced with yet another running track. Unlike the last one, it has a lopsided layout. Kinda interesting, but perhaps the most interesting aspect to this stadium is not visible in these shots. In fact, it's a long way from the stadium itself. Some spectators make a habit of watching the game from atop a nearby hill. That looks like a nice place to watch the game. Maybe bring some binoculars though. Estadio Luis Valenzuela Hermosillo. This too has one unique aspect. This time it's the see-through exterior made up of these louvers of different shades of green. I'd assume that is to allow for plenty of ventilation in what is a hot climate. Not only is it functional, but it looks great as well. Actually, come to think of it, I suppose it's similar to the last one in a way. You can in theory watch the game from outside the stadium. However, it is worth buying a ticket because it looks even better on the inside. Situated next to a lagoon that shares its name is Estadio Sausalito. To be clear, the lagoon is called Laguna Sausalito, not Estadio Sausalito. This stadium suffered significant damage in the 2010 earthquakes, and fittingly it kinda reminds me of California Memorial Stadium. The way it's a single-tier bowl carved into the hills. The reason I said fittingly is because that stadium literally has a fault line running down the middle of it. That's not the case here, but what it does have over California Memorial Stadium is the chairback seating throughout. Estadio Cap. Once more, we have a stadium that has no peer in this league. having a separate covered stand on each side of the field. I suppose you'd call it a classic British style stadium. The stands themselves are quite striking with their blue and black colour scheme, and I appreciate the attention to detail, particularly how the colour from the seating continues all the way up to the roof. It's a nice stadium situated in what seems to be a nice area right by a wooded hill. Estadio Luis Navarro Aviles. This is unsurprisingly the smallest stadium in the league, and it's perhaps the most rudimentary as well, with metal bench seating throughout. There's also an eyesore of a track surrounding the field, so it certainly has some of the worst facilities in the league. But it does have a BMX track next door, so... Estadio Nelson Oyarzun Arenas. Just a couple of years after it opened, the stadium suffered some damage from the aforementioned 2010 earthquake, where a part of the roof collapsed. But that's all since been repaired, of course. Overall, it is quite similar to La Florida, with its single tier of elevated seating. It has a lot less colourful but equally good looking exterior, and a very similar but monochromatic interior. I'm not sure which is better. El Teniente. Surprisingly, this small multi-purpose stadium was one of the few venues that hosted the 1962 World Cup. That was due to the other cities being hit by earthquakes. I'm starting to get the sense that Chile is sitting on shaky ground. Weirdly, this is the second stadium owned by that copper mining company, the one I mentioned earlier. I suppose it's not that surprising. After all, without coppers to control the crowd, there would be anarchy. So that makes sense. Nice stadium. Estadio Municipal de la Cisterna. This place is home to a club called Palestinio, meaning Palestinian. I was curious about that name, and apparently Chile has the largest Palestinian diaspora outside of the Middle East. The stadium recently underwent a minor renovation, as it was looking a little rough before these new seats were added. But still, it wouldn't look out of place in Palestine itself. I don't think we have to worry about this being demolished by the Israelis anytime soon though. Estadio Santa Laura Universidad SEK. The stadium opened 100 years ago, making it the oldest stadium in the league. When it was renovated over a decade ago, they went the extra mile to make sure every part of the stadium was in club colours, which are not the colours of the Palestinian flag like the last one, but the Spanish flag instead. The club is called Spanish Union in English, so that makes sense, plus it's always cool to have a mean looking eagle somewhere throughout the stadium. Estadio Nicolas Shahawan Nazar. Having been rebuilt in 2019, I suppose you could call it the newest stadium in the league. Although if the field is in the same place as the original stadium, as it is sometimes considered to be the same stadium. It certainly looks like the newest design. The curving stands and their arching roofs above them are spectacular. They've left one end without seating and have instead put up a big video board. There are some less desirable features that indicate its youth, and that is the synthetic turf field. Estadio San Carlos de Apoquindo. For a long time, this stadium was very basic. It even had wooden benches making up most of the capacity up until about 10 years ago. But in recent years, it's been undergoing a much needed modernization, starting with the addition of these new seats. And if all goes to plan, it'll end up looking like this in a year or two. A new roof, new video boards, new everything, other than the bones of the stadium. Hopefully it all works out. Estadio Nacional Julio Martinez Perdomo. The design of this huge single-tiered bowl of a stadium was actually inspired by the Olympiastadion in Berlin, and actually has an even more disturbing history if you can believe that, being used by Pinochet as a prison where political prisoners were locked up and tortured. Thankfully, Chile is a democracy nowadays and the stadium is being used for its intended purposes. It is the largest stadium in the country, and so it comes as no surprise that it's also used by the Chile's national team, although they do occasionally play elsewhere. So there you have it. Chile has some interesting stadiums for sure. As for which is my favourite, I think I'll go with this one. It's a unique design with features that suit the local climate. Anyway, if you're new, please consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching, have a good one.